Hey there, I'm Greg from GB Productions. I'm also here with Mitchell today, and we are finally back on the 58 K600B tractor project. It's been like 5 months since Mitchell and I worked together last. I did a very little bit over the Christmas holidays. So we're finally back now at the end of February here to do some more. So just kind of as an update from when we posted the last video there. All I did over Christmas was I finally got to the point of getting started with cutting the ridges out of the cylinders. So I ordered this ridge reaming tool from Amazon. I think it was $100. You know, this is where it pays off to actually know what you're doing. I had a pretty good idea, but the way this thing works, if you put it in the cylinder, and if you just rotate it and you keep, like, if you use like a ratchet or a ratchet wrench, it'll make it bind. And so within probably 10 or 15 minutes, I shattered the carbide cutter. And then afterwards, I went on to the Amazon site and did a little bit of reading of reviews. And the one guy said, oh yeah, it works really well if you put the cutter at 12 o'clock position and only pull with the ratchet from like 12 to 2, I think it is. We'll confirm that before we start again. So I'm like, okay, great, that's helpful. I needed to know that beforehand. So what I did is I went on to gbtool.com and I ordered 2 more of the little carbide cutters for this thing, so that if I do destroy another one, at least we have a third one. Hopefully from this point forward, it's gonna work just fine. And what I was using before was just the PB blaster. You are supposed to use some kind of, well, you're not supposed to. Lots of people do it dry, but from my experience with machining, you don't do any kind of cutting dry unless it's a dry cut saw. It's made for it. So that's basically all I got accomplished over Christmas. I wasn't able to spend a whole lot of time. I spent a little bit of time on cylinders 1 and 2 with the ridge reamer until I broke the cutter and had to wait for more to come. If we can get the ridges all cut out, maybe not today, but soon. And then the only other thing to do with the bottom end of it is use a micrometer on all of the connecting rod journals to make sure that they're within spec. I'll check the manual at some point. Otherwise, the new rod bearings that I got to replace the ones that are pretty worn aren't going to do anything. We're still going to have rod slap, which for how old is this thing? 60-year-old.
Well,
50,
60, 40.
Math.
60, 62 years old.
Yeah.
No, 64 years old because it's 2022.
Yeah, that what he said. For a 60-year-old unit that's, you know, not really going to do a whole lot of hard work other than snow blowing, it's fine.
And pulling cars out of the graveyard.
Yeah.
Which apparently is hard for this thing.
I got to get the tires loaded. And well, that'll be it. Then we'll have 500 pounds of mass per wheel, which will be no problem then for all that stuff. But yeah, as far as the bottom end, and I've got the pistons that I got knurled, which makes them a little bit bigger because our cylinders are 23 thou over.
So did you do the knurling yourself, or did you take it to a business to have it done, like third party?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't have the equipment to do it, and nobody that I know has either. It's a process that nobody does anymore, it sounds like. So all the shops I called, even around here, they either didn't have the equipment, didn't know how to use it if they did have it, or were too busy to do it anyway. So I actually just got Car Request in Lindsay, Ontario, which is where I was working part of the time this past year. I just got them to do it. It was like under $50 for all 4. So as opposed to ripping the whole thing apart, getting it bored out, buying oversized pistons which aren't available anyways, that made more sense, so that the piston won't slap around inside the cylinder quite as much. And we're gonna get the ridges cut out, and then we'll hone all of them and make sure those clean up decently so the brand new rings will seal well, and we should have more compression than this thing is worth having. But yeah, once we get the cylinders cleaned up, then as long as the connecting rod journals are okay, we can put the pistons back on the rods. I don't have piston pin bearings, so we'll have to check those, and as long as they're not really loose, we'll just call it good. And we'll do the rod bearings and put the new rings on, and then the whole bottom end can go back together. Then we're still waiting on me and time to get the valve guides changed in the cylinder head, and then the cylinder head and all the valves can go to my case tractor guy to get a valve grind job done. And then I got new head gasket and new seals and gaskets and everything, so we can hopefully at that point slap it back together. The hydraulic pump does need to be rebuilt, but we've been dealing with so much snow this winter. I just want it back together so that it can blow snow, and I can do that another time. So
Keep in mind, this project wasn't supposed to go on this long to begin with.
no, it was supposed to be like done by Christmas, but
And that didn't happen.
you know how it goes. Yeah, so I'm back to school now as of start of January, so I'm in Kitchener most of the time and drowning in schoolwork and assignments. Mitchell is now back to work, so he's working, it's basically night shift, right?
Well, it's extended afternoons, 4:10s.
So he's got a crazy work and sleep schedule now, so between that and my not being here, it's pretty hard to get stuff done. So this is my reading week now. Not that I don't have a whole pile of schoolwork and studying to do anyways, but we're here on Sunday because Mitchell's available, and we'll try and get some of this done.
I'll be here probably next Sunday, maybe, or next Saturday.
Yeah, hopefully, depending on what happens. But anyways.
Anyway, we're gonna cut and let all this frost drip off, and then we're gonna come back.
And we'll actually dig into this thing and see if we can make some progress. So. All right, so we're just going to pretend that we're starting this from the beginning, basically here. There are little ridges around the top of the cylinders here, if Mitchell shows, and if we have appropriate light. 1 and 2 I already did a little bit with. But basically, if you can slide your fingernail up the cylinder and you can catch it, usually considered to be enough of a lip that normally you wouldn't be able to get the pistons out. The rings would catch on the ridge there. So it was actually weird in this case that the pistons came out easily, maybe somewhat concerning, but we then found out that was because the cylinders are like 23 thousandths of an inch larger than they're supposed to be for the standard piston and ring size. But anyways, before we can put the pistons, which are now knurled, so they're 10 thousandths of an inch larger diameter than or they were originally, so they actually won't fit through the ridge on the top anymore, because that is still the original 3 9/16 diameter that they were from new. So we have to cut that out to be able to put the pistons, which are larger, and the new rings in without damaging them. And we also can't hone the cylinders, which is basically just really, really fine stones to polish them and get a good sealing surface for the piston rings, so we have good compression when we put it all back together. We can't hone without getting rid of the ridge as well. So the idea with this cutter is you put it in the cylinder and you use some kind of a lubricant. You can do it dry, but it's not worth destroying stuff. And you just snug it up and you turn it around and it slowly cuts that ridge, and you just have to try and make sure you stop before you dig into the cylinder surface. Not that it's the end of the world, because the piston rings don't go any higher than that, but you want to have, as best you can, true surface to hone afterward. So what I learned about this tool, at least some of them are better as far as the design goes. What I learned about this one is if you put the cutter point at what you call 12 o'clock, you need to pull with the ratchet or wrench between 12 and 2, I believe it is. I should actually confirm that here. But the idea is, if you use a ratchet wrench or a ratchet and you just keep turning it part way and then ratcheting back, eventually it'll make the tool bind. Just the design, the other 2 corners are rollers that just run around the inside of the cylinder. So you want to make sure that you're pushing down as well as pulling in that clock position to make sure it stays straight and true. Yeah, so this guy is the one I was going by. He says with the cutter at 12 o'clock position, put the wrench on at 2 o'clock position, and this is the only position to apply pressure to the cutter. because otherwise basically it binds, and like happened to me before, it shatters the carbide cutter, and then you either cry or start again. So we're gonna go back.
Last time, cry.
We're not gonna talk about that. Oh, I need that 9/16 wrench over there as well to adjust the tensioner screw here. So this has to turn clockwise. Oh my goodness. Viewed from the top. I got this the right way? Of course not. And I think this thing can do anything from like 2.5 to 5-inch diameter cylinders. So we're right in the middle of the range, basically at 3 9/16 more or less. So I had it back. It is a rubber elastic basically that tensions the cutter and all the rollers together. So I backed it right off so that it wasn't stretching the elastic when it wasn't being used. So this thing you don't want to tighten up very much. Basically you just go till it comes to a stop and then put a little bit on it and you try it, and if it doesn't seem like it's cutting much, then you can add a little bit more. Am I going to be clear of the camera here? Yeah, okay. So cutter is at 12. I'm going to try for 2 here. Mitchell's going to make sure I don't ratchet it, otherwise we're going to break the cutter. That's pretty close. And I'll put a little bit of this on, oh boy, on here, just so that it's not dry, but we don't want to be doing it.
So just before he begins and we go to what would be a time lapse, you can see that he's using a long extension here, and he's doing that to make sure that he clears the fuel tank and the radiator.
In the camera here, yeah.
And
If normally you'd be doing this and the engine block would be on an engine stand and you could do it down here, but because we've got,
of course, because this engine block is integrated into the frame of the tractor, we can't do that.
yeah,
Anyway, we digress.
always
Hopefully this succeeds.
digress. Right? Problem is, it's so hard to tell. I think it's doing a decent job, so we'll just snug her up a little and keep going. close, but still not quite yet. It's close. She's close. All right. I don't want to, I was thinking about tensioning it more, but I don't want to do that. Then it'll take a massive friggin' bite and we'll be undercut by a whole bunch. Ideally, again, this is my design brain always working. I want a overhead crane drill press or mini mill head so that I can just attach it to this. And you'll have slow, smooth, consistent movement. Now, the only problem with that is if something does happen, you destroy the whole thing because it just twists it up into a... I think we'll call it. I think we'll call it good. The hone will probably smooth out what's left there.
All right, so we're gonna cut the GoPro, and I'm gonna switch this to time lapse for the next bit. So here are all the metal shavings after we finished the cylinder reaming.
Yeah, cylinder ridge reaming, so now there's no more lip at the top of the cylinders, so we can put our new, quote, new pistons and new piston rings in without any damage occurring.
But before we do that, we got to clean all that metal shavings up and probably clean the cylinder itself.
Yeah, well, and we're gonna, when we're actually ready to put the pistons and cylinders in, we're gonna hone the cylinders, which is basically a really fine set of 3 really fine stones that you turn slowly down and back with oil lubrication as well. And that gets what people refer to as the crosshatch that it would have had when it was new. And it gives you a nice, perfectly true surface that the compression rings can actually seal. And we should have somewhere around 150 PSI on each cylinder.